Welcome to toy-polloi.
Hello and welcome to another video from toy-polloi, and today we're going to be taking a look at whether there are any variations between the modern Adventures of Indiana Jones retro collection figures from Kenner Hasbro. Now, when I first reviewed these figures, the cards that I was getting them on were really quite thin and quite weedy, but I had a lot of people get in touch with me to say that there is a second version of the card which was on a lot thicker cardstock. I've now managed to track down one of those thicker cards, and I thought it'd be fun to compare both versions of these figures to see if there were any differences in the two cards and between the two figures. So the thinner card I'm going to be calling version 1, and the thicker card I'm going to be calling version 2. Let's take a closer look at these to see if there are any other differences apart from the thickness of the cards, because I'm sure there must be. It may be that the figures are different, so we will be opening those up later in the video. But first up, let's compare the cards. So here are the two cards. On the left we have the version 1 card, which is made of a thinner cardstock, and on the right is the version 2 card, which is much thicker. Now, when I first bought these figures, I bought them direct from Hasbro, and the cards I got were these much thinner stock cards. I've only been able to get this thicker stock card by buying it from a secondary seller, and you can notice straight away when you pick it up that it is much thicker cardstock. It feels much more like a vintage sort of carded figure. This feels quite cheap, but how cheap and how thin is it? I have my digital calipers here. If we reset these to 0, you can see there it is 0. We'll put the first card in. This is the version 1 card. Put that in, close it up, and you can see that that thickness is 0.56 millimeters. Let's put the version 2 card in. Again, just check that zeroed. That is zeroed, and we can see how thick this card is. So this is 0.88 millimeters. So it's considerably thicker. It's a much thicker cardstock, and that's the reason that this feels like a sort of more like weighty card and just a more sort of quality card. They've used a much better cardstock. But are there any other differences? Let's take a close look at them. On the front, I have to say it's very minimal. There's a slight sort of colour difference between the printing. Everything else looks much the same. The blister on the Mark II card or version 2 card is slightly lower. The top of the blister just comes to the bottom edge of the word Indiana there. On the version 1 card, the blister is actually rising up over the word Indiana, so it's slightly higher on the card. Otherwise, I can't see any discernible difference. The details on them and the information on them is the same. If we turn it over, you can see again they are pretty much the same. The colour on the version 1 card is a little bit more washed out. If you put the two together, you can see that the yellow is slightly different in tone. It really is a little bit more washed out. There's a much more vibrant yellow on the version 2 card. And then there is one sort of obvious difference that I found, which is right at the bottom corner. There is a stamped on number. You can see here on the version 1 card it says 23301. When we look at the version 2 card, that number has changed and that says 30091. Now I'm guessing that this number stays the same on the type of figure, because I have another version 1 card here of a figure that I've already opened, and that number there says 23301. So those numbers on these first two are exactly the same. That, as far as I can tell, is the only difference between the carded versions of these figures. Everything else looks much the same. It's just a nice thicker cardstock on the version 2. The figures are mounted exactly the same. They've got the same accessories, the same bit of paper at the bottom. So let's now open these up, and then we can compare the figures to see if there's anything different on the figures. Because I know on the version 1 that I did open up, I thought his hips were quite badly put together, and there's quite a large gap that you can see there between his leg and the pelvis. And I've seen other people review these and their legs are much better attached, and they all seem to have come from the version 2 figure. So let's open it up and we'll be able to compare and see if that actually is an issue, or if it's just something that is sort of common across all figures, that some are good, some are bad. Right, so I've freed the Indies from their packaging. This is still version 1 on the left and this is version 2 on the right. So let's do a few measurements just to see how close these things match. So this is the version 1 whip for Indy. Let's measure that. We'll measure that from the very end of the handle and see how long that whip is. And that goes to just about, I'm going to say that's 11.5 centimeters. So the version 1 whip is 11.5 centimeters. The version 2 whip is, oh, that's a bit shorter. That is only 11 centimeters, so it's half a centimeter shorter. So the version 2 whip is a little bit shorter. If we look at the guns, I couldn't see any sort of discernible difference between the guns. This one I have already straightened, this one I haven't bothered to straighten. And if you don't know how to do that, then check out my video on fixing the bent weapons that come with these figures and the bent limbs. It's very easy to do. The weapons do look pretty much the same. I can't see any discernible difference between those two, so we'll class those as the same. And then we come on to the figures, and at first glance they do look pretty similar. There's a slight difference in the way the hips have been constructed. So the second version of Indy, the legs are attached a lot better. There's less of a gap on them. You can see here on this version 1 Indy, there's about a millimeter gap there on his right leg, and it's a little bit stiff to sort of move up and down. On the version 2 one, that gap has been made a lot smaller. It's about half a millimeter. So these legs certainly do fit on a bit better. They're still just as tight to move, but it is a better fit. So I think that's a definite sort of improvement. Then if we turn it over, this is where it gets interesting, because you know the numbers I mentioned on the back of the packaging. Well, those numbers match the number on the bottom of all of the copyright information on these figures. The copyright information is the same. It says Hasbro SA LFL 2023 Vietnam, and then there's a number which is V3625C, and that is the same on both of them, but underneath that there is another number printed, which on the version 1 Indy is 23301, which if I bring in the card, you can see there is 23301. Then if we look at the version 2 Indy, there's a different number there which says 30071, and if we look at his card, that one doesn't say 71, that says 30091, so the numbers don't match, but it is certainly a different number on the back of the figure. That's always quite interesting. Does that mean it's come from a different factory or a different production run? There's no real way of knowing, but certainly this second Indy, the version 2 Indy, has a different number, and I think is built slightly better. The quality control on it is obviously a little bit better, because I've opened up a couple of these version 1 Indies and they all have this same leg problem. This version 2 one just looks a whole lot better. So there we go. It's really not that great a difference between the two figures. The version 2 definitely has legs that are slightly better attached, but it also then has the slightly shorter whip. Whether the whips change in length depending on which factories made them or just who's cutting the string on that day, it's very hard to know. I'd be interested to see anyone else who's opened up these figures if their whip is a much different length to the ones that I've got here. It seems to vary on these two between 11.5 centimeters and 11 centimeters, so not much of a difference. Otherwise, the figures are practically the same. They have the same sort of flaws. The weapons are a bit bent, the paint apps are a bit off. Otherwise, they are much the same. It's interesting though why some of the cards are on this thinner card back and some on the thicker card back. That I don't know, and I don't think we will ever know. It's obviously down to the factories that produce them. So is there a variant or a version between these two figures? Apart from the different number on the back, not really. It might be that people like to collect them because they have different numbers on the back of them, but that is a really minor thing. But then having said that, people collect all the different copyright information versions of Star Wars figures, so this could be a future thing to look out for, the variant numbers on the back of the Indiana Jones figures. It's not something that makes any difference to the figures themselves, so from my point of view, I'm not going to go out hunting them. I do think the version 2 figure though is just slightly better, just because his legs are attached better. I hope this video has been of interest to you. If it has, then make sure to click the subscribe button and tap the bell to be notified each time I upload a new video. And thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching toy-polloi. Subscribe for more great videos. You can also follow toy-polloi on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram.